Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm DK Ronsta. International Mother Language Day is observed annually on the 21st of February. This year's theme is Multilingual Education, a Pillar of Learning and Intergenerational Learning. Our guest is General Practitioner and Cultural Activist Dr. Visham Bhimull. Greetings, Dr. Bhimull. Very happy to be speaking to you on the day itself, the 21st of February. But give us a little crash course now in terms of this day. How did it get started?
So I'm not sure of you how much you know the history of India itself. After the World War, um, India was separated from Pakistan. So in addition to being independent, there was a partition. People know about Pakistan, but they don't know about West Pakistan, which is present-day Pakistan, and East Pakistan. So what we know as West Bengal in India today and Bangladesh was actually East Pakistan. Um, as we look at the history of India and Pakistan itself, people know Urdu and Hindi. Urdu and Hindi are essentially the same languages. It's a political divide, political religious divide, you could say. However, Bangladesh and West Bengal are a bit different. They actually speak what we call Bangla in Hindi, or we know it as Bangladeshi or Bengali. So like India, when it tried to, or at least it made it, Hindi the language, one of the official languages, Pakistan wanted to make Urdu in both West and East Pakistan. However, the majority of individuals um, who lived in East Pakistan, their mother tongue or the language they spoke was, as we mentioned, Bengali, as we know in English, or Bangla in Hindi. And well, the administration that was in Pakistan wanted to impose Urdu onto these Bengali-speaking people who, at this point in time, imagine us speaking, let's say, English, and we were conquered by somebody else or had a political change, and were forced not to speak English or Trinidad English Creole. So, in the same way, they were it was the language of Urdu was being imposed on them, so much so that they felt that sense of identity in the Bengali language that shortly after the partition in 1947, in 1952, and then manifested in 1954, they actually had protests where people were shot and died for the language they grew up speaking. Um, I kind of get a sense of that as a Trinbagonian because I speak on my mother tongue is Trinidad English Creole. And well, I also advocate for languages known to be the origins of this, which would be Trinidad Patois and Trinidad Bhojpuri. And when people identify these languages as broken forms of a different language, English Creole as broken English, or Bhojpuri as broken Hindi, or Patois as broken French, I mean, that's the closest I might get to feeling my identity infringed upon, like in the 1950s by the now Bangladeshi and West Bengalis of India, who died for their language of Bengali back in the 1950s.
And thank you so much for that. And that level of imposition that you speak about is something that I look at from time to time, because my thing is that if systems were a little more inclusive, then each of these things could be learned a little more. So Trinidad Creole English, as well as standard received English, because I think sometimes we are under the impression that we grew up or we start learning like standard received English as opposed to something else, so that we should know certain things that we don't. I know some people are proponents of the fact that standard received English should be taught as a second language, and then you would see different kind of things happening, as opposed to, I remember somebody saying that, okay, well, I know that the children is playing the dot. So they were arguing with the HR manager and said they got there at 8 o'clock on the dot because they didn't realize, okay, well, no, this is for this and this is for that. But in terms of that imposition, what can just a level of mental inclusion do in terms of for all these languages? This is mother tongue and otherwise.
Well, I mean, maybe in a well, my mother tongue is Trinidad English Creole, um, not Creole English, English Creole, and moving from that to learning English at school, standard Trinidad English. Remember, it's not the Queen's English we speak, but it's our own Trinidad English officially. Um, and then traveling to other places and um, being able to speak now 6 languages, English excluded from that. Um, there's a whole, I think it's Czechoslovakian saying where if it is you speak more than one language, you view the world or you perceive it through um, different windows from different perspectives. That's an individual choice by myself. But what I notice is that other English speakers like me have difficulty in learning another language because, well, it's quite easy language of business, and everybody caters to English speaker as though they're privileged. Remember, speaking English is not speaking English is not a measure of intelligence, which we kind of tend to assume. And I think all English speakers assume that. Um, we see it now with regard to the circumstance in Venezuela politically, where the Spanish we would have learned at school find a use, at least in my world. However, as typical English speakers, I find the friggin' Begonian who would have been educated, they would know modern standard English and say, well, why don't they learn our language? Um, language is actually a element of one's identity. We fail to realize that, like the color of your skin. So that just like during colonial times, the color of one's skin was seen as measurement of how superior and inferior you are, people fail to realize that not speaking the language of particular country could lead to situations only immigrants could understand. I might know it now. Reaching out, I guess, as a person of Indian origin, I felt I needed to know the language of my ancestors and then even learn ancestors, meaning not just genetically, but also being Trinbagonian, because we have Trinidad Patois, we actually have the Warahu languages, Warahu or the Mesoamerican, the Caribbean, Arawak languages. All these have contributed to who we are. And it's quite unfortunate that still, let's say, bogged down by a colonial education system, we don't realize that um, we shouldn't, we are proponents of speaking English. However, our colonial history has made us so diverse that that education system should realize and be reinvented or reappropriated. A renaissance is needed to let our people know that not only Carnival is our culture, but the language we speak also identify us as Trinbagonian.
And that is something that we're going to get into when we return from the break. There are two things that I want to follow up on in terms of learning the language of your ancestors, especially with the theme being a pillar of learning and intergenerational learning, as well as the fact that looking at roots and grammar of mother languages, mother tongues, especially the Trinidad English Creole. So we get back to that when we return. We're speaking with Dr. Visham Bhimull. Stay with us. We come back with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with general practitioner as well as cultural activist, Dr. Visham Bhimull, on International Mother Language Day. Now, Dr. Bhimull, in terms of like the roots of Trinidad English Creole, and we say Trinidad specifically, especially like patois, and what are some of those elements of grammar, syntax, semantics? Give us some ways that we can define, make distinctions, please, morphology, etc.
And this is also a way to emphasize uh, that nothing is pure, everything is mixed. As English speakers, people fail to realize that English actually is a mixture of two languages, a language related to Dutch, which is Anglo-Saxon, as its grammar system and vocabulary of Old French. This has happened in Trinidad as well, where our English Creole is basically gets its grammar from Trinidad Patois, which in turn gets its grammar from West African languages brought by slaves, um, and English vocabulary. So you actually have underlying West African grammar through Patois and English colonial vocabulary. Um, I'll give some examples because I mean, I always go back to my grandmother and how she spoke and how my mother tongue, which is hers, I grew up with her from 3 months old to the age of 16. And I never saw any sort of inferiority complex in speaking it even today. Um, so I will go through the tenses in English Creole, Trinidad English Creole, and how we got it from Patois, and how these are not broken French or these languages are not broken forms. So in Patois, if you have to say I went, it is usually moi te allé. I did go. My nanny used to speak like this. Again, you see the grammar system remains the same with the raw verb and the tense marker. Did go, tense marker did go, the raw verb. So in Patois, it's moi te allé, and in English Creole, that becomes I did go, or I did go. Um, then I go to school every day. Um, you say in Patois, moi ka aller. I go habitually, or I just go. My nanny would say now, I remember, I does go to school every day. Does the tense marker, if we bring the same go, and then in future tenses, I will go. In Patois, it's moi kai ali. And that translates in English to I go. I will go to the market tomorrow. You see, it has a grammar system that it gets from Patois. There are also other forms and elements from Trinidad Bhojpuri. Like in English, you wouldn't say he 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 come running or look he running coming. We do say that in standard English. We use in English verbs, but that's how you say it in Hindustani, which would be door ke, u door ke, he run and come, or he run come, literally. So again, these are just grammar elements from basic languages or our ancestral languages, Trinidad Bhojpuri and Trinidad Patois, to see how it contributes to not a broken English, but an English that is a Creole form and a language in its own right.
And you say that, and I smile just for more than one reason. One, when you say using the Trinidad English Creole, it resonates with me and it feels so much more visual, and I can see it. I can see him run coming. And I also appreciate that respect that you give to your grandmother and who would have had such a formative influence on you. And I also think of the way, as opposed to having a word and a comparative and superlative, and different words for that. Sometimes you may double up on a word or triple up on a word to give an idea of degree. The thing good, you know. So it makes sense this way to have it explained like this by you. So we thank you for that. But in terms of being able to see through the eyes of someone by being able to speak their language. And you spoke about two influences. I feel it's so much more for English, you know, Dr. Bhimull. English just teeth, you know. And also giving an idea of power. Because looking at the fact that in the kitchen, you would have had, I remember someone laying out to me, so the animal might be sheep, and that was more, I think, English, or pig, but in the kitchen, where the French held sway is mouton, like mutton, or is pork is the next one, but giving an
Yeah,
idea of
swine
who
and pork.
held sway in what area and using those as historical markers. But I ask that, well, I say that to ask, how does being a polyglot expand your horizons as it regards to language, culture, society on the whole?
It's how you view things. Yeah, the other one you want to remember is beef cow and pork and swine. Um, when you express something in one language, the way and perspective you might express is different. In Spanish, tengo hambre, I have hunger. But in English, we say I'm hungry. In Hindi, we say mujhe bhook lagi. To me, hunger is felt. So that's just two examples of, I mean, it's saying the same thing, but the perspective you're looking at, where the source is from, is not the same position, right? I am hungry versus I feel hungry versus hunger is felt to me versus I have hunger. That's just one example. And there are even aspects of time because there are certain expressions we use in Hindi, English, or even Patois, where the perspective you get of time actually varies. I do have examples now, but I give you a short story. I was coming home from Paramaribo. I went to the airport. I would drive quite tired coming in the Caribbean Airlines. Only Trini could tell you the story. I walked up quite tired, looking at the woman who's gonna check me in. She was Surinamese Creole, people of person of African descent, but mixed. So I went up and I was like, should I speak to this woman in Dutch or should I speak to this woman in English or English Creole? And I decided Dutch and I said, Goedemorgen mevrouw, hoe gaat het met jou? And she started speaking back met mij, gaat het goed? En met jou? And we started speaking in Dutch for like about 3 minutes. And then after she asked where I was from, and I said, well, I'm from Trinidad. And she stopped for a second, and her basis of existence had a little bit of shake because she didn't realize that I'm Trinidadian. She thought I was from Amsterdam, based on how I speak, and I probably have my parents who moved there and I was born there or something. But the whole idea is that to vacillate such is like changing the color of your skin. Uh, being Spanish at one point, being Portuguese, or being somebody from Africa or India. I travel a lot around the world, and a lot of people assume I'm from India. What part of India you're from? But when I traveled the first time to England, and I was buying in London at the grocery store um, chocolates. We usually do that as Trini to bring back to our family, Maltesers and so. And the cashier said, "You from Trinidad?" And I said, "Yeah, how you know that?" She said, "Well, you're talking just like me, you're Trinidadian." And the first time somebody actually identified me as a Trinidadian, I felt so proud. So again, that emphasizes that need for such a day where we are so proud of the way we express ourselves to know that it's an element of who we are and our identity.
And with that, we want to thank you so much. According to his Krokro say, help raise we nose. But thank you so much, Dr. Bhimull, for sharing, especially on this day itself, International Mother Language Day. And on behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Ronstar. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.